Our lives are a string of insights, flashes of inspiration that can be the catalyst for new ideas. However, our pace of life these days means we tend to miss some of them completely. I'm Dave Hill, and I'm the host of the Simple Reflections podcast, a fortnightly series of interviews with people from all walks of life. Our conversations are an invitation to reflect on some of the simple insights my guests have had that have gone on to have a profound impact on their lives. So grab a cuppa and a biscuit, join us, slow down for a little while and see what shows up for you. Welcome to the next episode of the Simple Reflections podcast. Today I'm joined by Rose Latham. Rose is a life and leadership coach based in Salisbury in Wiltshire, somewhere close to my heart, having spent quite a lot of time living there myself. She's a former teacher before taking up coaching, among other things. And Rose and I have crossed paths a couple of times in the last year. We did a program together with a lady called Jackie Moses this time last year, which was really fun. And then she's cropped up on various things to do with Ankush and his world, which has been fun to see. And I just liked the energy that she brings to stuff. And I just thought it'd be lovely to have a conversation with her today. So welcome, Rose.
Thank you, Dave. That's a lovely introduction. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm always interested in what sparks people today. You know, what is it that in your world at the moment is lighting you up and getting you excited?
So there's a few things going on that I'm involved in that I'm excited by. The first thing in my own world, in my own coaching practice, is I have started to run group programs, and at the moment they're quite small and intimate, and I really love them. I really love running them, and the reason for this is it really brings together my skills and experience of running groups and connecting with people. I've always been a really great connector, networking, if you like, but connecting with people in all different walks of life and feeling comfortable with people at different stages of their career and different ages. Running workshops from a teaching perspective, standing at the front of the room and facilitating. So it brings all of that together, plus the coaching and the deep work. So that really lights me up. That's what's really I'm excited about this year, doing consistently running a programs, a series that is ongoing, that supports a wide range of people. I mean, essentially, I work with business owners and solopreneurs. So that's who comes to my groups. And running parallel to that, you mentioned Ankush Jain. So I'm part of his movement, if you like. I'm sure he talked about what he is up to in the world of raising the consciousness of the planet by supporting coaches to create ethical and sustainable and viable businesses. And I joined Ankush's school last year as a paid participant. I absolutely loved it. It's an incredible experience, and I got so much out of it, and it really cemented what was being shared was really bringing being into the coaching space in a very practical way that supported me to grow my practice, which I got full for the very first time and felt a lot more confident in what I was doing and why I was doing it. This year, in this current cohort, it's quite interesting. I now have a completely different role. I'm now working alongside Ankush. So he invited me back to be the client experience director, which essentially means that I am supporting the participants. So the school has grown this year. There's about 45 people who are paid up members, who are taking part in coming through the school. And there's 2 points to this. On a practical side, there's more people to manage and look after. And then on the energetic side, there is a lot more energy going on in that room. And Ankush already works alongside Felipe's his operations guy, and Felipe's an incredible partner with Ankush in creating his programs. Does a lot of the behind the scenes organizational pieces and operations. So if you like, I'm now HR and supporting people in the moment with their desires, needs, wants, questions, queries as we go through, and being part of that team. So it's an incredible privilege, honor, and also exceptional experience to have been invited in to be in that way part of this movement. So those are 2 major things that are really spark me for 2025 and that are going on in my world right at this moment.
That's cool. It's interesting. I'm dabbling with group work this year as well in a more formal way. So I've done a little bit in the past. I volunteer into a thing called Heartfelt Presence, which is sort of group work in that sense, but the group is never the same. And I just sort of sitting here smiling about the client experience role that you've got. Part of the veteran stuff that I do, the Always a Rifleman program that I'm a mentor for, and one of the volunteers for within that. We ran some equine therapy a year or 2 ago now, and that was basically my role. I'm not particularly good with a horse. I know they've got a bitey end, a smelly end, and they've got the ability to make themselves very heavy on your feet. So I try and steer clear of them, or I have done. But I was there to live in the accommodation with the guys, some of whom were struggling with drug and alcohol addiction, various other bits and pieces. And I was the human connection when they weren't there with the horses. And there's something to be said for that. A guiding hand that's part of it, but also not integral in the running of it, that is there to support people when they need it. I think it's a really, really wonderful idea, and it's great that you've been, brought in to do that. That's lovely.
Yeah, and I guess I can sort of hear the similarity, right? So this is a very new space for me to be operating in, because I having been through the school, I've got this great position of being able to see both sides. So it's an incredible learning experience on the one hand, but it also meant the first weekend that so there's 3 live weekends where all the participants come together in London, which are integral to the magic of the school and really where it all comes together. You can imagine you've got, 45 of the most powerful, courageous and influential coaches emerging on the planet right now in one room, all looking in the same direction, being led by Ankush, who's at the absolute top of his game, one of Europe's leading business and coaches. It's a phenomenal experience. And yet I turned up to the first weekend and there was no JD. There was no job description. So I'm like, I've never been in that situation before. So, what's really interesting is to have had and be in this experience of me having the experience. That is what blows my little mind, my small mind, each time. So just to give you an idea of what that means, is the first weekend I was so open. I was like, we're meeting, everyone's coming together for the first time. We've met each other online. There's been a couple of masterclasses, say. We're all coming together. I'm familiar with, there's some people who've been through the program already. So they're coming back the second or third time into the school. And and I'm familiar with the environment and I've got some knowledge of what's going to be talked about, but it's intuitively led by Ankush.
Mm-hmm.
He's creating it in the moment. And I just turned up, went with that. And the whole thing, my experience was just me unfolding and flowing in the moment. And this is highly unusual for me. I'd say unprecedented, because my whole way of being and approach to anything, pretty much looking back from this moment, is, well, I'm a former teacher. There's no way that I would have turned up to a class. I mean, it happens on the odd occasion, but 90%, 99% of the time, you're turning up to things with a plan, with a point of direction, of travel. You've anticipated all the questions. I know how things are going. I'm checking people's learning. It's very structured, not very in the moment. There's a lot of in the moment reactions and responses, but there would also be a lot of in the moment reactions to those interruptions as well, right? So the whole experience for me of that first weekend was beyond anything I've ever experienced before, magical. And what sort of really cemented it for me, of this looking and experiencing life in that way, was it was a really safe container in which to do that. And that's not a requirement, but was a really safe space for that to happen. And B, at the end of it, I just did what made sense in the moment, right? So somebody asked for a piano because there was one of the musicians, she wanted to perform a piece. So I talked to the hotel and they organised to have a piano brought down. And there was lots of things like that, right? In the moment, I was going, oh, we'll just go and do that, or I'll go and sort that, and I'll go, because that's what made sense. That's kind of what I was there for. And at the end of that weekend, I received a standing ovation for simply being me. And I realised that, wow, I didn't have to try. I didn't have to plan. There was no structure. There was no sort of precondition to me being there about how I needed to be. I was just completely relaxed and completely myself, and I've heard this phrase of like doing what makes sense in the moment, and that was it, just unfolding. And it was all enough, and I was enough, and it was perfect, and it was exactly how it was meant to be. And that was such an incredible and powerful experience for me. And as you can hear, I've got a lot to say about it. So
That's cool.
But it's one of those things I'm just like, oh my gosh, so if this can happen here, this can happen everywhere. What happens? Like, what's possible when more of that, I allow more of that everywhere? Like, that's the kind of inquiry I'm in right now. And the second weekend was completely different again, because my thinking mind got right into gear. My whole is, am I enough? Have I done enough? What if it's not enough? What will they think? Is this okay? That was in overdrive. It was really interesting. And I remember on the third day of the weekend, standing and looking at myself in the mirror and sort of just suddenly having this realization, like, none of this is my thinking. Like, this isn't mine. This is like, I can put all this down. And so the third day I had a magical day again. I was back there, or back with myself, like back it being me. So it's a very interesting experience. I don't know if you relate to that. I don't know if you've had that from that, like, coming, because your background is, again, pretty ordered and structured, I would imagine.
Yeah, yes, it is. It is really ordered and really structured, and also completely open to going with what's in front of you. So it's a really weird thing. So, yeah, as you were talking about that, I remember my first job outside of battalion. So, I've gone through training. I've done my first tour as a platoon commander, and then I got posted back to the very place that I'd just finished training in, if that makes sense. So I did one job and then I went back to school, went back to school, but as the teacher, which was, I probably had your second weekend experience to start with, because I was thinking, oh my goodness, here I am teaching conventional or leadership in a conventional warfare setting, having only operated in Northern Ireland, which is a very different setup at that time. It's just sort of showing my age a bit now. And so I was like, oh my goodness, I've only done 1 2 week exercise on the very thing that I'm going to be teaching. So that was a sort of, okay, right, interesting. And then I got my list of students. All of them had just commissioned, less one guy who'd come from the Kuwaiti army. 3 out of the 12 I was teaching were older than me. And that freaked me out. Absolutely freaked me out. And then that only lasted for about 2 or 3 minutes. And I went, wait a minute. When I was in their shoes, I just wanted to hoover up information and learn. And I'm the one that they're learning from, because I'm a few steps ahead. Okay, that's fine. So it all just settled back down again. But it's fascinating, the stories that we can create in our mind that get in the way of us being able to be who we are and thrive. And I think it's lovely. Now I don't see it as a problem when my mind gets caught up in itself. It's an indicator that I'm just not on form right now, which is fine. That's good to know. That's like having a pain in my knee that tells me running at the moment isn't a good thing to do. There'll be other ways to exercise. Now I can choose to ignore that and push through and be stubborn, probably cause more damage. And that's the same with our interactions with people. And that's the simplicity of it for me.
It's in the moment. It's recognizing it in the moment, I think, is the challenge. It's not even a challenge. That's what's available, I think. And it's really seeing for each of us, like the signature of it and how it expresses and sometimes it's something physical and sometimes it's something emotional, sometimes it's attention or whatever it is, but it's like really slowing down to see the signature of it is so helpful. And I think that's such a part of my journey right now and for my clients as well. Like that's what I see. And it's fundamental and it's also available, and it's like seeing how we put so much meaning on all these things. So it's really fun just to experience. It's just riding the experience of me, right? I think that's just this persona Rose who's created, who runs these stories, right? That's how I think about myself, like in these moments.
Yeah. There's lots to be said in that. There's getting comfortable with reading the signals and knowing that they are always there, and sometimes we're going to misread them, misinterpret them, or just not notice them, and know that that's okay. That's perfectly normal, perfectly ordinary. That's what everybody's doing, unfortunately, and that the system's response to that is to ramp it up. And when it ramps it up, it's not because things have got worse. It's just trying to get our attention.
Yeah.
At which point we're like, oh, okay, right. Well, I could have done that yesterday. Let's take a step back from that. Now, the could have done yesterday could be a judgment thing, or it could just be, thank goodness I've caught it now, and see where that takes us. But the opportunities are endless when we see that there are indicators built into us by design to allow us to not only thrive, but grow and learn in a way that we never thought was possible for us.
Mhm. Mm. What does that mean for you now then, looking forward, like looking into this year for yourself?
Great question. Um, I'm just getting really curious about the stories that I've been telling myself over the years, um, that have been there as a sort of safety net. Some of them have been a bit judgy, I suppose, um, and seeing what's possible despite them. So, just I've had a rough couple of months with rheumatoid arthritis, and thankfully the system here has been really great and just put me on a 12-week sort of rehab exercise thing in the local gym, which is about 5-minute walk from my house.
Mm.
Um, Gyms have been things I've avoided my whole life. I much prefer to be exercising outdoors and running around the place and doing things in the real world and just getting exercise from that rather than sitting in a room and moving, either moving something inanimate around the place, or strapping myself into some form of machine. That's never sort of felt like me. Um, but actually, the last couple of weeks of doing just that, like, oh, okay, this isn't what I thought it was. And yeah, after this call, I'm wandering back down to sign up and become a member, uh,
Yeah.
because it's there and available and is a safe way for me to rehabilitate. So why not get involved and do more than my once a week thing? So it's interesting. It's before I'd have gone, oh no, you'll be wasting your money because you won't stick at it. Like, well, I can't stick at it if I don't start. So it's those kind of things I think is being open to following those little nudges that say, yeah, that might be a good idea, and ignoring, well, no, not ignoring, that's a bit unfair. Listening to the sort of back chat from my mind and saying, yeah, thanks for that, but I'm going to carry on anyway. So
Mm.
yeah, that's I think that's where 2025 is starting. I have no idea where it's going to go. We'll see.
And I guess I hear in that say what this concept that we have of who me
Mhm.
is is so wafer thin, isn't it? Even though it looks like it's constructed from steel, and it's actually tissue paper thin. Once you start poking it, like, oh, that's not me. Well, who is me, and who's deciding what me is, and what's that? It's all that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That kind of plays out, and yeah, it's really fascinating, really fascinating. And I think, like, when you say there's no end of opportunities to explore this stuff, I get the sense, I can see again and again that's completely true, right?
Mhm.
And I'm thinking about, so last year I was involved in organising, I was on the leadership team for organising the Ultimate Birmingham Experience, which took place in May. And I was the speaker liaison, and what that involved was speaking to, coordinating these like world-class coaches to come and speak on stage for free. If we didn't pay them. In fact, they had to pay their own travel, their own accommodation, their own flights, and it was being for me, being in that world, that I had some stuff around it.
Mhm.
I had some thinking about, who am I? Am I enough? Is it? Can I do this? And who am I compared to them? And there was a lot of that going on. And the thing that I realized, it sort of kept meeting again and again and again and again, was the tissue paper thin nature of that story, and how it just seems to have a grip. It looks like it has a grip, but it just keeps showing up for me to so many different moments just to poke my fingers through and go, yeah, still just missed, still nothing really there. Like, come on, level the playing field. Like in my mind, like that example you said earlier about the types of experience you have. It's I think this plays, I think it's very common in people, like everywhere. I think it's a very relatable idea that many of us take incredibly seriously, including a lot of people in the coaching world, right? And it's
Oh yeah, yeah.
like, this isn't unique to me. I think
No, no.
it's very easy to put people on a pedestal. And one of the things that I love about who I have like on my phone, say just from that experience, not as in who I've got on my phone, but as in who's just a normal person on my phone who just
Yep.
happens to have been in this world for longer than me, right? They've been doing this kind of work for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. It's people,
Yep.
simply humans, and the world over, we're just constantly, you have to, it's not you versus your mind, but it's like catching your mind as your mind creates some like comparison narrative and all this thing going on. And yet, and yet you can have all that knowledge and the insight, which is I guess where I'm coming to, is available again and again and again and again and again in various forms to see.
Mm.
And someone can tell you, oh, we're all the same. They're just a human being. But until you really experience that, that drops in your, what for me, when it drops in my body and I really viscerally feel it, it's a nice idea that other people are talking about until something opens in me that allows that to permeate through and become a new reality.
Mm.
That's been a really interesting experience of, certainly since I've moved into coaching, of
Yeah.
like moving things from theory into my lived day-to-day experience.
I've just, as you've been saying that, my mind, I'm dyslexic. I'm a fairly visual thinker, and I was just imagining what does that look like? And for me, what conjured up was Kaplunk, the
Yeah,
bright
yeah.
ideas that people had of the marbles, and it just takes one straw
Mm,
thing to be pulled out, one peg to be
mm,
pulled out for that to drop in and for us to
yeah.
realize it. And it's the dropping of that into
Mm,
us going, oh yeah, no, I've seen that differently now.
yeah.
That's so exciting. But I think, that getting back to this bit of we are all human. Now, it doesn't
Mm,
matter what the job title is or
mm,
experience or the rest of it, we're all the same. I was doing a piece of work with a big UK bank, crikey, nearly 3 years ago. And it was interesting. I was sort of playing the facilitator role, I suppose. The idea, it was a sponsorship program for one of their employee engagement networks. It happened to be their disability network, which was the membership of that was diverse in itself. So there were people with physical disabilities, people with cognitive disabilities, and also the carers of people that fell into that world. And so there were real mixed bag in there. And the idea was they wanted to change some direction in their working life, either look for somewhere else in the bank to work, look for a promotion, or is a move outside into the big wide world a better thing for me? So that was the intention for the participants. They were all being married up on a one-to-one basis with a senior member of the leadership team. And the idea was it wasn't a mentorship thing, it was a sponsorship thing.
Yeah.
The grown up, for want of a better word, had to get behind their person, really get to know them, and then advocate for them amongst their peers, going, right, Joe Bloggs has been working with me for the last 6 months. This is what I've learned about them, and I think they'd be ideal in your world and your world and your world. Who's up for a conversation? So really putting their skin in the game as well. So there was enthusiasm and excitement, but tension on both sides.
Mm.
And it just happened by chance that I spoke to the sponsors first, and they were almost all petrified about getting it wrong,
Yeah.
saying the wrong thing. Do I ask questions about why they're members of the network? Is that crass? Should I be probing? What if I say the wrong thing? Loads and loads of thought in their mind about getting this wrong, not only
Mm.
for making life uncomfortable for the person they were speaking to, but also for themselves and for the bank. And it was lovely being able to speak to them first, because I said, right, well, do you mind if I share your fears at the moment with the group I'm speaking to this afternoon? Because I think it'd be really helpful for them, because they were all about, we don't know where to start, and these people are, we don't want to be wasting their time. And I just said, look, before we even start, I know that's the direction you want to go in for this conversation, but can I just share what I heard from them this morning?
Mm.
And it blew their minds. But it's also allowed them to realize that everybody involved in this is the same. They've just got
Yeah.
different job titles, different experiences, and that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me, yeah, it's such a great example, actually. It's a brilliant example of how we get all up literally in our heads, in our thinking, and
Mm.
how that then, because you can imagine if you hadn't have had that conversation, you didn't say how it gone, but that would have changed the dynamic, right, of
Yeah.
whatever happened afterwards. Because it's like you then just have you've given yourself permission to say, is it okay if I ask this question? And that can come from both
Yeah,
sides.
yeah.
And yeah, that's really fantastic. And it reminds me of so many things. I'm thinking the first thing that came to my mind was that in teaching, I would organise. So I was the head of sixth form, and I would organise um, work experience fairs alongside my colleagues. It wasn't just me. In fact, my role was pretty minimal, to be honest. But one of the things that we did do was I would talk to the sixth formers and prep them to go and speak to, we'd have external people,
Mhm.
um, anyone from any kind of walk of life, basically, and they'd come and have a stand. And I'd get some of my, we'd all call up our friends, like, hey, can you come and do, hey, would you, call in all the favors.
Yep.
And they loved it because it ticked their being corporately, socially responsible. But it also brought up a lot of fear. I remember talking to my friends before who were, my age and whatnot, terrified about going into school, terrified about talking to teenagers. What do I say? What will they think? All exactly the same as what you've just described. And then the students completely terrified. What do I say to them? What do I ask them? But what will they think of me? What if I don't? What if I've got nothing to say? That was their biggest. What if I've got, and both sides. What if I've got nothing to say? Then what do we do? And it was exactly the same thing. Same thing plays out in coaching. I see one of the biggest misconceptions and cynicism actually that I meet when I speak to people who. So I do a fair amount of networking locally, and so I create a lot of my clients and relationships through that, and I love it. And one of the things that I meet again and again and again is this wall of cynicism, because what if I can't? I don't need coaching, because they have an idea of what coaching is, and which what I've started to see is that there's a lot of people that run book groups who have been coaches prior to me, and that's what a lot of people think that coaching is. I've seen that a lot, which is interesting. There's nothing wrong with running a group around a particular book. But yeah, but that's just a different story that someone holds. But again, it's that, well, how can it help me? I don't, and I don't need to be told what to do. There's all these misconceptions. And what if I don't know how to answer a question?
Mhm.
And then this goes on, and it's really, and I guess what we're saying is like, this is going on everywhere, in everyone, all the time. And I have this image of, to use the image analogy, and I've drawn this for clients before, two stick men, or stick people, and it's just these thoughts just talking to each other. That's essentially what's going on without the sort of human to human connection, which just gets bypassed in this. With just my thinking and story is just going to talk to your thinking and your story, and we'll just do this. We'll just peck at each other with our or not. We'll just ignore each other, and I'm never going to talk to you. So it is really. It's fascinating to see that can be a default, but it's not how anything has to be. It's not fixed. And I think one of the beautiful things that I notice about this isn't unique to coaches, it just happens to be in the coaching world in which I operate and connect with people, that the human to human connection happens in a completely different way, and guiding people, business folk, in that way. It's because they also, my clients experience this as well. The fears that they have around going to that meeting with that person is simply all of that you've just described. And when we slow it down and start, okay, so how would you connect with them if we just take away the fact that there's any kind of I don't know, quarterly review going on? If we just take that out, how would you talk to this person? Oh, well, and then it's different. It's so interesting.
Yeah. The sort of needs to put a persona on for a certain type of task. I've got to be careful. I don't give anything away. There was an organisation I was in at one point. I won't even mention the regiment. The commanding officer was very capable, very charming. But when it came to giving a set of formal orders, he put his beret on in a certain particular way, and then completely changed. And it was not robotic, but it was, I am putting on a performance now. And then he'd take it off again at the end. It's okay, I can get this as a formal process. This is, this is getting across important information where we're potentially putting people's lives in danger as a result of what's going on. So there needs to be an element of seriousness about it. But you could just be you. The show bit is getting in the way of, in this instance, his capacity to be himself and be free with the interplay that was going to come from the questions. Now, that's years before I came across the idea of coaching. We can, coaching is a way of, it's basically inviting a fly on the wall for want of a better term, that, my role as a facilitator with that bank was a fly on the wall, bridging two worlds and trying to help them realize how similar those worlds were. And there is a lightness that comes with being an outsider, because you're just there for a gig in that sense, and it's not on you to do anything directly. And that's the same when we're observing the world around us. We can see when people are having tricky conversations, whether we're a coach or not. We can see whether they're creating that trickiness, whether that's frightened, whether they're anxious, whatever it might be, whether they're nervous, and we can feel for them in that sense. That's the joys of being a human being. We have this ability to potentially feel what they're feeling. And that's why people like watching the television and going to the cinemas. They get immersed in the story, forgetting that the life that we're living is a story that we're creating. And our experience of that comes through our feeling in the moment. And that's guided by, being brought to life by our thinking. And from there, an understanding of that allows us to press pause at times when things feel really, really uncomfortable. And that's what's so amazing, I think, in the work that you and I both do, is There's a wonderful chap called Bill Pettit who talked about it like being there while someone's unwrapping a present.
Yeah.
They've got this thing already. They are completely unaware.
Mm.
Um, but at some point, the wrapping's going to come off, and they'll be amazed at what that opens up for them.
And I think this is really, I think seeing it in your own life is so critical. I'm really like caught by, but before we came on air, you said, you described what this is about how really your podcast is really about how people learn from insight rather than being told things. And that unwrapping of the present, I think, is a great analogy from Dr. Bill Pettit. And where I see it in my own life playing out in real time, very up close and personal, again and again and again, is with my children. And before I became a parent, or when my children were quite young, I would hear people say, my children are my biggest teachers. And I honestly didn't get what they were talking about. And it's taken me quite a long time it feels like it's taken me a long time. Maybe it hasn't. It's taken some time to really see that for myself in a way that makes sense for me. And I've got like really clear examples in my mind around where, and this is particularly pertinent since I've moved into coaching and understanding that I now have that we're talking about, and how my kids are just my immediate mirrors as to my state, as to what's going on, and I constantly get to choose whether I fuel a state that is unhelpful or a kind of thinking that's unhelpful, or I hold space, or I can shift it or mold it and I'll let things go. It's so interesting, so fascinating. And also this insight piece, and I've got a brilliant example I'd love to share if
Please
there's
do.
time. So this is when I came into coaching, it wasn't via the principles, which is kind of what we're talking about here, about how the mind works. I came through a different route, a bit more NLP focused, and over very quickly, within 6 months, within 2 months, I came into the being movement and was organising the ultimate experience in London, and very quickly, within 2 months after that, did the landmark forum, came into that kind of work, and then people started talking to me about 3Ps. So there was a rapid unfolding of these fantastic ideas that have really shaped and unpacked and unpicked how I view the world, and helped me understand how my mind works and what's going on, and support my clients and people I work with in the same way. And so I had in mind this, like, oh, children are your biggest teachers. And I was like, really? I just find parenting quite challenging. Like, it's where but the best of me and the worst of me comes out, right? It's where this bit of me that if I was being filmed, I'm slightly embarrassed about how I react at times. Like, I'm a bit like, oh God, did I really say that? Am I really doing that? Is that me? That side of me. And in that is the gift and the opportunity. And I remember this one time, my daughter, so she's older, I think she must have been 7 or 8 at the time this happened. She's going to gymnastics, loves her gymnastics class, and she was doing a routine. And she went into the class, and the teacher played the music that she was going to be doing. And this all happened, I wasn't there, and she didn't like the music, but she carried on, started doing this routine, starting to learn the routine, came home that night, and was just really upset. Got to the point that she was really, really worked up. She really didn't like the music. And the challenge for her was, like, she just didn't know how to talk to her coach about it, didn't know how to tell the teacher. And so I talked to her, and I was just like, well, what if, started making suggestions. What if you tell her? I can't tell her. And she just got more and more and more worked up around, it looked like, the thought of saying what she really thought to somebody who she really wanted to like her. Basically, she was worried that her teacher wasn't going to like her or not like her opinion in something. She got really upset about it. So I realised, knowing my daughter, I was just, well, also just people, I was like, there's no point in me offering any solutions. That's not what she wants. And so I kind of looked at my partner and he's like, what about? And I was like, no, just, we just stopped saying anything. We just held the space, held her, allowed her to just be really, really upset. It looked like there was nothing we could say, nothing we could do. Half an hour of like very intense emotion and upset. And then she went to bed and we just didn't talk about it. She had gymnastics the next day. That time she was doing it 2 nights in a row. Forgot to talk to her about it before she went in. She goes in, she comes out, like, and I'm suddenly like, oh, as I'm picking her up, I'm like, oh, but I'll ask her, And I said, so how was gymnastics today? How's the routine? She's like, oh, I spoke to Mandy, the teacher. I spoke to her, it's all fine, changed the music, and walked off down the corridor. And I was just like, oh my gosh, would you look at that? I was like, did anyone see that? No, no one cares. It was, for me, that was everything we're talking about in action. She had her own insight at her own moment. She didn't need any interference from anyone else. She did need to be held and regulate herself with us, but she didn't need our interference. And she worked it all out on her own because her system that's what her system does. It gave her the answer that she needed at the moment she needed it. And she then got to choose if she's going to follow through with it. And it made complete sense for her the next day. And of course, she just changed the music. What's the big deal? And I was, wow. And in that moment, I was like, that was with the consolidation of, this is why our children are our biggest teachers. I was like, would you look at that? Would you look at that?
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. I think being a parent has opened me up to not only that I'm going to be learning all the time from that, but actually opened me up to the opportunities that are beyond the home. There are lessons for me in everything, and that's the same for everybody. And if I'm alive to that, then there's more chance I'm going to see them and learn from them.
Yeah.
And that's just exciting.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. And I think, you talk about these roles, I think the role of parent can weigh heavy, depending on who you are and how you relate to your own childhood. And I've certainly experienced myself with a tendency towards a particular type of parenting under particular circumstances, which I have completely just let go. If the camera was going to video me now, I'd be much happier with how I am being with my kids, because I just take it all a lot less seriously. I take my thinking a lot less seriously in those moments where that authoritarian parent is like, well, they're just gone. They're just far less present. They get far less airtime, and I mean, what an incredible thing. And the consequence of that, I'm so much more present. I'm so much more in the relationship with my children, like in an actual relationship, rather than some sort of how I thought parenting was supposed to be. Like, I say this and you do that, right? It just doesn't work like that. And it's been so beautiful. It is so beautiful to see that again and again and again and work in partnership with my kids while still holding certain boundaries that we're all kind of on board with. Yeah, it's a fantastic experience, and I really agree with what you're saying, because it's really something that's always stuck in my mind from Steve Hardison, that I've heard him say multiple times and read about in The Ultimate Coach, is the work of who you are being really starts in the four walls of your own home. That it's easy out there, it's easier out there with people you don't know. The toughest, and well, he doesn't use that word, the most important work, though, and this is certainly true for me, is in the four walls of your own home, whoever you are in the most intimate relationships with, because that's when your true, unfiltered thinking shows up and just can be expressed, and that's where there's so many opportunities. So it's coming from like love for yourself and a softness and a grace and compassion, which then goes towards everyone else as well. It's the scope for forgiveness or just letting things go in a much more loving way is just available again and again and again. And I see it in my clients as well. It's where people come to me talking about career issues and problems at work, and very quickly we start talking about what's going on at home. Mm-hmm. I'm sure I'm not unique in that. It's just, but because you're just like, well, if this is happening here, it's happening there too. Mm-hmm. Let's look at that. So thank you for sharing that, and thanks for allowing me to share that. Yeah.
Rose, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Just before we wrap up, is there anything that you've got coming up in the next few months that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm running group programs, which I'm loving and have been really successful. And the first of these has been based on or inspired by my learnings in the AJC school and Chris Jane's coaching career school, and supported by Johannes Metzler's book, From Stress to Success. Mm-hmm. So the course is called From Stress to Success. I will be running a second iteration of that, likely around April time. So keep an eye out for that. It's for business owners who literally want to go from feeling stressed to having more success, exploring key themes like deep listening, creating strong, powerful agreements, where to find clients, and how to create a business from word of mouth, retaining clients and referrals. And the second program that I will be running, likely May time, will be the program I'm currently running called Money Mastery. So that's fantastic. Both programs are 6 weeks long, and Money Mastery is helping people to unpack, unpick, and rewrite their money stories that they have, inspired in part by the work we did with Jackie Moses. But it's a piece that has so many layers and shows up for so many business owners as being problematic, in inverted commas. So these are two courses that I'm running, and I will be sharing on social media. So look out for me on LinkedIn and Facebook are the two main places where you can find me.
Fantastic. Well, we'll put links in the show notes so people can find that.
Thank you.
Rose, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again for taking the time to listen today. I just want to add a couple of reminders. One is I am running a workshop on clarity and decision making on the 12th of March. If you'd like information around that, there's a link in the show notes. Secondly, I had the absolute honour of being invited onto my good friend Jed Roberts' podcast called The Amazing Mindset Chat Room. What's doubly honouring is I'm his first guest, which is really cool. You may remember Jed. He was in episode 9 back in July 2023, so he's been part of the Simple Reflections podcast journey for quite a while, and is a good friend. Jed was so touched by the conversation that we had that he decided to split it into 2 parts, both of which are now available. And again, you'll find links to those in the show notes. If you've got any questions about either of those, I know one of them has a slightly or potentially disturbing title, On Purpose, to try and shake up how we look at things. Part 1 is called PTSD is not a disorder. That's my personal belief. If you want to learn more about that, go and have a listen. And the second part that's just been released is called Human Connection. Both of those topics are dear to my heart, and if you'd like to learn more, I thoroughly recommend Jed's podcast. Anyway, I look forward to our next guest in a couple of weeks and seeing where we go with that conversation. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today. If you've enjoyed the conversation, feel free to subscribe and join me and my new guest next time. If you're interested in the work I'm doing, or you think I can be of service to you or your organisation, please email dave@simplicityofmind.co.uk. Remember, see if you can find time to slow down and reflect. Those simple ideas might be worth listening to. Take care, and I hope you can join me in a couple of weeks.